The label control is used to display text to users. And whatever you enter into the text property at design time is what shows up in the label at runtime. What are the types of things you might want to do with a label? Well, you might want to change the appearance of a label. And to do that, you can use the auto size property, which controls whether or not the label automatically sizes. So if you enter more text than would fit into the label by default, setting the auto size property to true will make the label resize. That saves you some work at design time. You can also use the border style property to control whether or not the label has a border around it. You might want to show and hide a label at runtime. There are a couple of ways you can do this. You can use the visible property. If you set it to true, the label is visible. If you set it to false, the label is not visible. That's pretty straightforward. You can also use the hide and show methods of the label, because calling hide automatically sets the visible property to false. You might want to display an image and text at the same time in a label. You can do this by using the image property to specify the image that you want to display, and then also using the text property to specify the text you want displayed. And then again using the auto size property to have the label resized to show both the image and the text. And you might want to use a label to display help text at runtime. And maybe you don't want the form to show up with the help text already there. You want this to be more contextual. Well, to do that, you can use certain events on the label to determine what the users have done. So for example, you can use the click or the double click events to have help text appear when the user clicks or double clicks on a label. You can also use the mouse enter, mouse hover, and mouse leave events to have text appear when the user moves the mouse over the label. Let's go see a demo and see how to use these techniques with a label. I'm in Visual Studio and I have the Common Windows Forms Controls project open. And right now we're looking at the Label Text Box form, and this has examples of labels and text boxes. We're going to look at some labels on this. This one here will show me if the customer is international or not. This one here shows me the customer ID. And if I select this one and look at the properties, we can see that I've set the border style to fixed single. I have a choice of no border, fixed single, or fixed 3D. So these first two labels both have a border around them by setting the border style to fixed single. Down at the bottom, I have a label without a border, and this is going to display today's date when the form starts. There's also another label in here, and you can see that the cursor changed as I scrolled over it. And this is the help label, which currently is visible but has no text in it. There are a couple of ways that a label can start with no text in it at runtime. One is to at design time not put any text in there. The second would be when the form loads, blank out the text. Now if I can't seem to find this label, I can always just come into the Properties window and select Help Label. Okay, let's run this form and let's see some of these labels in action. I'm going to select Label and Text Box Controls, and that brings up this form. So on the bottom you can see the date, and that showed up when the form started. Let's go look at the code for that. I'm going to switch back and forth between the form running and code. And in the form's load event handler, and that happens when the form starts, I'm going to set the text property of the current date label to today's date using datetime.today.toString, and then when I specify capital D as the format, that shows me today's date in long format. As I scroll from customer to customer through the customers table in the Northwind database, the customer ID is going to change, and if the customer is international, this label displays text. If I find a customer who's in the US, that goes away. And that code is here. As we move from record to record, if the country text box text is not USA, then the international label's visible property gets set to true. If the country is in the U.S., then the international label's visible property gets set to false. We could also call the show and the hide method of the label. Both of those do the same thing. Now I can also use the label to display help to the user. So if I click in the phone fax field, then I get some text that tells me how to enter phone numbers for this country. And if I move to a new country and do that, then I get a different set of instructions. And that's done up here. When I enter the phone text box, if the country is the USA, then the help label text is this. Otherwise, it's something else. And then when I leave the phone text box, the help label text gets blanked out. There's another way to display help. And the other text I want to display is regarding the postal code. So as I hover over postal code, you can see that the help label changes to let me know that in the US, we mean zip code by postal code. And then when I move off, then the help text goes back to what it was. And then in addition, I have help for the region. If I click on that, then I have help text that tells me what region means in the US and in Canada. So let's go back to the code and see how we did those. Well, for the region, it's pretty straightforward. In the click event handler for that label, I set the help label text to the appropriate text for region. So when the user clicks on region label, that text appears. For the postal code, I'm using the mouse enter, the mouse hover, and the mouse leave events. The mouse enter occurs when the user moves the mouse over that label. And the mouse leave occurs when the user moves the mouse over. Now, while the user has the mouse hovering over the label, then the mouse hover event fires. So what I'm going to do is as the user moves the mouse over the label, at the very beginning I'm going to store what the help text currently is to the variable help label text. And as the user leaves the mouse hovering over the postal code label, then I'm going to change the help label text. And then when the user moves the mouse off that label, the mouse leave event fires, and I'll set the help text back to what it was. The last thing I want to talk about with labels is the ability to have both text and an image in a label. So how did I create this label? Well, let's exit out of here and let's see how to do that. I'll just create a new form here. And we'll just call this practice. And then from the toolbox, I'll drag a label onto this form. Let me just pin this so I can see both. I'll drag a label onto this form. Now what I'm going to do is set the text property to developing applications with Visual Studio 2008. And this resizes because the auto size property is set to true. Now what I want is an image in here. So I'll come down to the image property and I'll click this ellipsis, and that brings up the select resource dialog. And the select resource dialog gives me the ability to identify the image or resource that I want to display in this label. If the image I want is already a project resource, then I can select that. Otherwise, I can add an image. So to do that, I'd click local resource and then click import and then navigate to the folder that contains my images and select one of the images in here. So let's choose this one. Then I click OK, and now you can see that the label sort of has an image. Well, what I want in this case actually is for auto size to be set to false so that I can resize this myself and get both the image and the text. Now I don't want the text up here, so I'm going to come down to the text align property and align the text in the middle on the bottom. And now I have a label with both an image and text. So what you've seen in this demo is some of the things that you can do with labels on a form. Obviously, you use a label to display text to the user, but by using some of the techniques we've seen here, you can have your labels be a little more useful than just showing static text.